Hey everyone, it's Pam, and today I'm going to be doing something a little different. A lot of people have been doing rankings lately using Tier Maker, and I kind of want to get in on that action. John Riggs has been ranking NES games by developer, a whole bunch of makeup YouTubers that I follow have been ranking various brands, and I thought that I would rank all of the NES games I've ever reviewed on my channel. It just seems like the NES is getting a little ignored at the moment since I'm so into the Sega games right now, and I wanted to take a look back and see how they stack up against each other, because honestly it's just fun to rank things and say one thing is better or worse than another. Now when I looked through my videos, I found out that I've reviewed 40 NES games, which is kind of a lot, but I'm committed at this point, so I'm going to rank them all into tiers, and yeah, let's go and rank things. Alright, so we've got our tier list up here. I'm sure you can figure out what the rankings mean, but S rank is like top tier, the games that I would put as the best on the system. A is games I would recommend anyone would go back to and play again. B is, they're good games, I might have a few complaints about them. C is mediocre. D is not very good, and F I find has no redeeming qualities at all. There's probably not going to be very many in the F category. So I'm going to put on some game footage up here. It might be widescreen because that's just what my reviews look like when I started this, but let's start out with the very first game I ever reviewed on my channel, and that is Felix the Cat. This is one of my favorite games from childhood. There's a lot of nostalgia wrapped up in it, obviously, but it's also just a very well executed game. It's a late release, so it looks and it sounds really good, and it plays very well, and I just love it, so it's going to be our first S rank on the NES. My second review that I ever did for NES games was Star Tropics. This is another one that I played a ton in childhood. I really like this game. I know it's a bit of a Zelda knockoff, but this is the one that I grew up with, and as a result, I find it is more fun than the first Zelda game. I don't think it's like top tier. I'm gonna put it in the A tier because I think it is a very good game, but I have a few complaints about it, but it's good. It's one I've played through a number of times in my life. Next up, we've got Hudson Hawk, which is a tie-in for a very strange movie, and this is one, I'm pretty sure I borrowed it from my cousins, and I didn't like it as a kid. It was always very difficult. It has some sort of weird mechanics where he throws a ball. Sometimes you're fighting nuns. It's just an odd kind of game, but I'm going to put it in C, I guess. I don't think it's probably not bad. If I were to go back to it again, I would probably like it more than I did in my original review, but I don't think it's really anything to write home about, So now we've got Maniac Mansion, and this is one that I actually reviewed for an event called Review a Great Game Day. And as I was playing it, I was disappointed because Maniac Mansion is a game I really loved on PC, but playing through it on the NES, realizing that point-and-click adventures don't play very well on the NES. There was also a ton of censorship it went through coming to this platform, and that kind of sucked all the fun out of it. So I'm putting this in the C category. I think that Maniac Mansion is a good game. The NES is just a bad platform for it. Now we have Kirby's Adventure. This is a really good one, not too difficult, which I quite like. It's got a beautiful, beautiful color palette and uses the NES hardware sort of to its most extreme. It's a very late release as well, looks fantastic, and I'm going to put this in the A category. Okay, next up we've got Panic Restaurant, which is one of the more rare games on the system. This is quite pricey now. It is a cartoony, bright and colorful platformer that uses food as its sort of theme all throughout, and I actually think this is a really great game. It's a lot of fun to play. It's a little more challenging than Felix or Kirby, but not, overly punishing, and I think it's actually quite great, and I'm putting it in A as well. Next we've got Adventure Island, and this is a series that sort of got better as it went, but I didn't care for the original Adventure Island at all. I thought it got very repetitive. All the bosses are pretty much the same. I don't really like how, what's his name? Mr. Higgins moves, and I just wasn't really a fan of this one. I'm gonna put it in the C category. Now, Flintstone Surprise at Dinosaur Peak was actually pretty decent. This is another one that's quite rare, and I wasn't expecting all that much from it, but it ended up being pretty interesting. You can play as both Fred and Barney, and they each have their own set of skills. I do find the difficulty curve a bit all over the place. It starts out fairly easy, but then there are certain points, like timed sort of chase segments, which just get brutally difficult. So I'm gonna put this one as a B rank. Next, we've got The Guardian Legend, which is one of my favorite games on the NES. I did not play this one as a kid, I just played it for the first time when I reviewed it for my channel. It combines a great shoot 'em up, which is one of my favorite genres, with an sort of top-down action, and I just love it. I love the combination of genres and think it's just a very excellent game overall, so I'm giving this an S rank as well. Now, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers is one of the Disney Capcom games, and I don't think this one stands out as much as some of the others. It is cool that you can play it co-op and play at the same time, but it's overall just, I don't know, not as interesting as some of the other ones, so I'm gonna put this one in the B rank. And after that, we have Breakthrough, and Breakthrough is a decent arcade port. It's just sort of like a horizontal driving shooter kind of game, and I do like it, but it's not super interesting. It's kind of short and fairly simple. There are definitely much better games of this genre, so I'm going to give this a C. So my next review after Breakthrough was Disney's Adventures in the Magic Kingdom, and this is one that I did have as a kid. I played this a lot. Some people don't love this game. I really like this game. I found that it mixes up genres. There's a few platforming levels. There's like basically a quick time event level. There's a racing level. And I really liked it. It is short. There's only really 5 different stages, but all the stages are so different. And this is one that I've played a ton, so I'm giving this an A. Next up, we have Gunneck, and you've probably heard me talk about Gunneck if you've been here for a while, and it is my favorite space shooter on the NES. It's just so colorful. It's almost getting into the like comical parody zone that games like Parodius would go into later. You're fighting like carrots and big cats and like killer bunnies and things, and I just think it's really, really fun and has a great soundtrack. So this is going in the S tier. So now we've got Deja Vu, and this sort of belongs in the same place as Maniac Mansion. It's not a bad game. If you could like play it on an Apple II or whatever it came on, it would probably be much better. But just when you start getting into like inventory systems and things in NES games, it gets too complex, and moving the cursor around with the D-pad just sucks. And I didn't really like the ending of this game either, so even though it's got a cool aesthetic and a cool story, I'm putting this in the C, because again, the NES is just not the platform for point-and-click adventure games. So now we have Prince of Persia, and if I can find it, it is one of my most hated games from childhood. I remember having this. I never got very far into it. As I played it again to review it, I didn't find myself feeling any better about it. I hated the 60-minute time limit. I hated the jump. For some reason, it's really difficult to just jump in this game. I'm tempted to give it an F, but it does have a good soundtrack, and it does have very cool animations, so I'm giving Prince of Persia a D. I think this was the first review I ever did where I kind of showed disdain for a game. Alright, what do we have next? Legendary Wings. This is, where is it? A shooter. It sort of switches things up a little bit, going from vertical sections to sections where you're going horizontal. And it's interesting. It's got a neat kind of Greek-looking aesthetic, and it's okay, but it's not great, honestly. You know what, I'm gonna give it a B. It's decent. Not my favorite shooter, but there are definitely many worse. Alright, Mega Man 2. I had not played much Mega Man at all before I started my channel. I remember once going over to a friend's house and they were playing one of them. I can't even tell what it was. I just remember the like level selection screen. And so this is really the first time I played any significant time into a Mega Man game, and you know, this game's awesome. I think everyone knows it's an excellent game. Great mechanics, great controls, amazing soundtrack. So Mega Man, where'd it go? There he is. Mega Man is going into S rank. Now, Home Alone is an interesting one. I think my review for this game was about 3 minutes long. There's just really very little to this game. It's not a very good game. You set traps for the burglars, and there's not even an ending. I think you just like play it for 20 minutes, and if you survive that long, you win. I don't think it's very good at all. I'm gonna give it my first F, I think. Alright, now we've got Gunsmoke, and this is a cool arcadey vertical shooter, and I quite like this game. There's a weird thing with having to get warrants to be able to progress to end levels, which I found a little odd, but overall I really liked how this played, so I'm gonna put this in B. Alright, now we've got Jaws, and I know Jaws has its fans. I'm not particularly one of them. The actual levels where you're floating around and spearing fish and things are okay, but the sort of overworld and the general concept of the game is kind of obtuse. Like, if you don't read the manual, if you don't know what you're doing, it's going to be very difficult to know what at all you're supposed to do. But it's not totally irredeemable, so I'm going to put this in the D category. Alright, next we've got Blaster Master, which is a really fun one, a combination of vehicle, traversal, and sort of overhead action segments. It's a bit of a Metroidvania, sort of, because there's some backtracking and things. And though I did have a few complaints about this when I reviewed it, I think overall it's a really fun game, and it keeps things interesting by changing things up a lot. So I'm going to put Blaster Master as an A. What's next? Zexis. This was a little bit of a controversial review because I didn't really like Zexis very much. It's one of those games like The Guardian Legend where it's combining a couple different genres. One's like a side-scrolling platformer and one is more of a shoot-'em-up, but I didn't think either of them was done particularly well, especially the side-scrolling platforming levels. They were just sort of odd and just filled with doors that I found very annoying. So Zexis is going into the C category for me. I wouldn't call it a mediocre game, but I have strong positive feelings about some things, but an equal amount of strong negative feelings. So that's why it's sort of getting that C rank for me. Alright, up next we've got Kid Clown in Nightmare World. And this is another colorful, cartoony platformer. Not as good as some of the other ones I've talked about so far. It's not a bad game, it just doesn't really stand out a whole lot, and some of the levels are kind of ugly, so I'm gonna put Kid Clown as a C rank. Alright, next up we've got the sequel to Star Tropics, Zoda's Revenge, and I like this one. It sort of improves on the first in a few ways. The movement isn't as stiff, you can sort of move more freely rather than just square to square in a horizontal or vertical manner, but that also introduces some issues for the platforming. I do really like that you sort of go around the world and you're in Italy and Egypt, I think, but there's also some very annoying things like holes in the ground where you fall through and just have to fight a bunch of monsters and then go back and try to avoid the holes again. So I'm going to put this in the B rank, because I don't think it's mediocre. I think it's decent. It's just not quite as good as the first game for me. So I'm gonna rank Rekka here, even though it's not on NES, it only came out for the Famicom, but it's close enough and it's the only Famicom game I reviewed. This is a really excellent shoot 'em up. It's got some amazing visuals. There's so much going on at the screen at one time. It's kind of insane. It's just very, very, very difficult. So I'm gonna put this in the A rank. Alright, this list is starting to come together. The next one is Jackie Chan's Action Kung Fu, which is another bright and colorful cartoon-like platformer, and I really liked this game. It has very solid mechanics. It has great facial expressions on the sprite for Jackie as you're going through the game, and I think there was one level I wasn't super crazy about, but all of the rest were really colorful and really fun to play, so I'm putting Jackie Chan as an A. Then we have Journey to Silius, which is a platformer that was supposed to be a Terminator game originally, and you can still kind of see that in the backgrounds of it. This is a really fun one. There is a few places where taking damage is a little cheap, but you do have a health meter rather than like one-hit kills like so many other games like this have. So I'm giving Journey to Silius an A. It also has a really fantastic soundtrack. Overall though, just a really fun game and I recommend it to everyone. Next up is the Three Stooges, and this is an odd one. I watched the Three Stooges with my dad as a kid a bunch, and I like their slapstick comedy. It doesn't translate all that well to a game. It's basically like a board game where you're just redoing maybe 4 or 5 little mini games over and over until it ends, and it's not that fun. It's can keep your attention for 10 or 15 minutes and then don't really want to play it anymore, so I'm going to give this a D. So now we're on to Ducktales, and this is a game that originally I judged quite harsh. I really didn't like the pogo mechanic, but I went back to it a few years later, ended up making a sort of bigger, more historical kind of video on it, and I liked it a lot more. I got a hang of the pogo stick. It's a really nice looking game with really good sprites and things. It's a lot of fun to play. I'm gonna put this as an A rank. It's good and it has some classic tunes, as I'm sure everyone knows. Now we have Toki, where you play this little monkey who shoots fireballs, and this game is just fine. I'm gonna put it in the C category. It's a little mediocre. There's nothing really wrong with it, but there's not a whole lot that makes it stand out from all the other platformers out there. And after that, we have Isolated Warrior, which is a really interesting game, one that was a bit of a hidden gem for me. It has isometric perspectives, and you do some platforming. There's some levels where you're like on a hoverboard or a jet ski or something. Switches things up quite frequently. Is quite tough. Like, there are some deaths which I feel are a bit unfair, but overall, really good, interesting game that's a bit different than a lot of other games on the system, so I'm giving Isolated Warrior an A. The next game is Trogg, where you play a dinosaur? Do you play a dinosaur or do you play the caveman? I think you play the dinosaur. It's basically a puzzle game where you need to get items and avoid enemies. And it's interesting, though I found that it definitely overstayed its welcome a little. I think there's 50 levels in it, and I found myself getting a little tired of it about halfway through. But it's an alright game. I'm gonna give this maybe B or C. I'm gonna give it a C. Yeah, it's okay, but it starts to get a little boring after a while, kind of gets a bit stale. Next up is City Connection. This is another sort of very arcadey game where you're kind of painting the roads and just jumping back and forth on these non-level roads, and there's little pig cats that come out of nowhere and will kill you. It's very strange. It's not a bad game, but again, it's one of those ones where you spend about 5 minutes with it and then you're like, okay, I'm done with this. I've seen all there is to see, so I'm going to put this as a D. So Super Spy Hunter is the next game, and I think I'm going to go a little out of left field here. It's a really fun shoot 'em up. It's like a vehicle shooter, and it changes things up all the time. Sometimes you're in a car shooting at other cars, sometimes you're in a boat, sometimes you're flying an airplane. It's got really cool boss fights. It's got some really great, interesting graphical effects, like a swaying bridge that you're going down, or like you're jumping up and then going back down to the earth and you can see the road like getting bigger as it approaches you from underneath. And I was just really impressed when I played this. I had a ton of fun playing this game, and I'm gonna go for S rank. That's maybe a little bit surprising, but I don't hear very many people talk about this game, and I think it's really, really excellent. So if you haven't played Super Spy Hunter, definitely give it a try, or check out my video on it if you want to see more. Now we have Abidox, which is like a horror shoot 'em up. It's got some sort of weird and kind of gory, for the NES anyway, kind of visuals. It's an okay shooter. It's got some interesting levels, but I also found it quite frustrating at times, just in terms of like how difficult it was to not hit the wall as you're going through these levels. So I'm gonna put Abidox in the C tier. It's okay, but it's not that great. It could play a lot better than it does. The next one is Zen Intergalactic Ninja, which is a beautiful game. It's another one that changes things up all the time. Sometimes you're doing a sort of isometric perspective combat and platforming. Sometimes you're like on a rail car or doing something like that. Sometimes it's just like a straight 2D kind of platforming thing. It's got some of the best animations I've ever seen on an NES game, and I'm gonna put Zen as an A. So Wacky Races is exactly the kind of game I think of when I think mediocre. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but it also doesn't do a whole lot to stand out, and even though it's using that Wacky Races property, there's no racing at all. It's just a basic 2D platformer, so it's just fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but nothing memorable about it either, so that is going to be a C. Next up, we have Pinball Quest, and this is a really interesting one where you're basically playing pinball, but you're traveling up through, I think, 5 different boards, and along the way you can kind of level up your pinball to make it stronger or faster. I'm actually having a hard time remembering how you level yourself up. But you go from stage to stage in a really interesting way, although it is incredibly frustrating because sometimes, like if you really screw up, you can go all the way from like one of the top tables all the way back down to the beginning if you just fall all the way down, which was very, very frustrating. But this is a very novel game. I know there's a few pinball RPGs out there now, but at the time, I think this was sort of one of the first of its kind, so I'm gonna give it a B. We are down to the final 3. Monster in My Pocket is a Konami game based on the little toys that used to get sold in the 80s, and it's another one where it's just straight C rank. Nothing terrible about it, but also really nothing memorable. Found it a little bit on the dull side. Adventures of Dino Ricky, if you've seen this video, you know that this is the most negative I've ever been about a game in any video. There's also a lot more swearing in this video than I usually swear in my scripted videos anyway. Dino Ricky is definitely an F. I thought this game was absolute bullshit. People have commented on that video saying, oh, if you think this is the worst game on the NES, you haven't played enough NES games. And the worst thing about it, the like insidious thing about it, is that it starts out okay. Like you start it and you're like, oh well, this game doesn't seem so bad, I can get into this. And then it tricks you and it's like, ha, here, have some auto-scrolling platforming. And then it just turns into an absolute shit show. So that's why it's the worst game on the NES to me. Not because it's, you know, unplayable or broken, it's because it tricks you into thinking it's alright, and then just like pulls the rug out from under you. And last but not least, the last game I reviewed for NES was Conquest of the Crystal Kingdom. Yes, Conquest of the Crystal Kingdom, and this is a cute game. You have a dog sidekick, which of course I love. It looks really good, it plays really well, the sound effects and the music are all great, so this one is also going in the A rank. Alright, so this is my final ranking here. I'm pretty happy with that. This is all 40 NES games plus one Famicom game I've reviewed over the past 6 years, and which ones I think fall where. Let me know in the comments if there's anything that you agree with, disagree with. Do you think I was overly harsh on some things, or maybe a little too lenient on others? Of course, these are all my opinions, and some are sort of complicated by nostalgia and things, but I'm pretty satisfied with where everything has wound up. And of course, if you want to hear any more thoughts on any of these games, all of them have a video on my channel somewhere. If you just use the search, I'm sure you'll be able to find it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.